Kimalala, it's so good to see you. Oh,
First, we missed you. Very nice to have you back.
very good to be back.
Hey, kids, what time is it? It is time for Gezintahait Street. And the story for tonight is about the previous Rebbe's release on Yud Beis Tammuz. Just to get a framework of what we're talking about, today was the 7th day of Tammuz. So next week, on like Tuesday and Wednesday, will be Yud Beis Tammuz. And the previous Rebbe got released from the clutches of the Soviet government of Stalin on that date. And here's the story, what happened. The first thing happened, he was in prison, and then they sent him to what they call, what's that thing called where they send you to? Exile. He was sent to exile.
Like they sent Boris Karshina.
Right. He was sent to exile in a place called Kosterma.
Oh, I was there.
And there in Kosterma, he had to report to the secret police, the GPU, on a regular basis. He used to have to go into their office every day or every other day. And when he appeared on Yud Beis Tammuz, the guy who was sitting there, the secret police guy, who usually had a straight Russian serious face, all of a sudden was very smiling. And he gave him surprising news. His release had been ordered by the authorities in Moscow, and a train ticket would be issued so that he could return to his home in Leningrad. When Rabbi Eliyahu Chaim Altais, who was accompanying the Rebbe, heard that news, half of his face turned pure white, and the other half turned blood red. And the Rebbe had to calm him down. Since that day was an official holiday of the Soviet government, the ticket could not be issued until the next day, Yud Gimel Tammuz. A bird from heaven carried the good news to the few Hasidim in Kosterma. And before the Rebbe reached his lodging, the celebrations had already begun. Rabbi Michael Dvorkin was dancing around the house with a small bottle of strong vodka in his hand. And as he danced, he was singing, "There is none beside him. Yet, Yekavo, Anyavo, Kram Yavo." Rabbi Michael continued dancing and singing exuberantly for over an hour. In Kasama, the Rebbe lived with the local shochet, who had a young son. When the child saw everyone's happiness, he too began to celebrate. He started walking in his hands with his feet up in the air. Our Rebbe teaches that this story can serve as a lesson in our own service to Hashem. There were 3 different responses to the good news of the Rebbe's release. 1, Rabbi Michal danced around the house with a bottle singing exuberantly. 2, Rabbi Eliyahu's face dramatically changed color. 3, the child walked on his hands with his feet in the air, which is similar to the famous Baal Shem Tov story about the ignorant boy in Rosh Hashanah. He didn't know how to daven. When he saw people beseeching Hashem for mercy, he gathered all of his strength and he called out like the roosters he saw in his yard, cock-a-doodle-doo. God have mercy. And his simple prayer was so effective, it annulled all the bad decrees. Similarly, every person travels through 3 stages of life. He travels through being a child, he becomes an adult, and he reaches old age. And actually, we experience these stages every day, or certainly every year. First, the person achieves a level of immature intellect called small brains, mochan dekatnos, similar to the child who celebrated by walking on his hands, even though he had no idea of the import of the news. He didn't even know how great that news was, but he was celebrating because everybody else was. Second, a person acquires a complete intellect, a mature brain called mochan dekatnos, like Rabbi Michoel. He grasps the greatness of the miracle. Third, a person acquires a settled mind, Yishuv Adas, like Rabbi Chaim Eliyahu, as it says, the older the person, the more settled his intellect. But in each of these cases, those involved exceeded the ordinary level of service. The child didn't just jump for joy, he walked on his hands. Reb Michoel, who understood the miracle with his intellect, didn't expound about the wonderful news. He danced around like it was Simchas Torah. And Rabbi Eliyahu Chaim, who had a settled intellect, was so overwhelmed that the previous Rebbe had to calm him down. The lesson is that each stage of our development, holiness should permeate a person to the point where it overwhelms his existing faculties. And thereby it enables him to reach a new and a higher level of service. And that's what's commanded in the command, Shema Yisrael, listen, Israel. That is the service with all your might. And the word your is the key. Through the service of all your might, when we serve with all our might, a person draws down the level of your might, of the Hashem's might, from the above, the true source of might, the real mighty one. We want Mashiach now. How about a niggin, boys? You're not ready for a niggin? I can start to say Chassidus. It's up to you.
We're gonna do a nigga.
Oh,
Yeah.
there's Labe. Oh, why, yeah. Okay, thank you, boy.
Oh, this reminds you of home, no?
Yes, yes, definitely. I love this nigga.
Okay, now all over the world, they've been having siyums of the Rambam. And if anybody doesn't know what a siyum is, the Rambam wrote a book, a magnum opus, which included all the laws of the Torah from beginning to end. It was a very long book. There's 14 books included in it. And the Rebbe told us that we should finish that book every year by doing 3 chapters a day, or every 3 years by doing 1 chapter a day, or by doing the Rambam Sefer HaMitzvahs, which are all 630 mitzvahs. And if you do those every day, then you will have done the whole book of the Sefer HaMitzvahs in a year. And the Rambam was the first to index the entire body of oral law. In other words, he took the whole Talmud and he picked out what was the actual law that came out from the arguments of the rabbis, and he wrote it down in a logical and a systematic way. He even included laws that will only be relevant in the time of Mashiach, like the laws of tithing, the Jubilee year, the service in the temple. And to this very day, the Mishnah Torah, that book of the Rambam, remains the only work of this scope that contains all of this. And the Rebbe told us that we should encompass it over a year, or at least once over 3 years. And by following the daily Rambam cycle, every individual has the ability to study the entire body of Jewish law, a goal otherwise not within the reach of most people. Those capable do 3 chapters a day, so they finish it in 1 year. And those unable to study 3 chapters like me every day, the Rebbe said, there's a parallel track. You can do 1 chapter a day and you'll do it in 3 years. And for those who find even that too difficult, the Rebbe said, you can do a 3rd way. In the 3 chapters a day, it contains certain mitzvahs, and you can learn the mitzvahs for that day. And that way, in a year, you will have covered all 613 mitzvahs. And since It takes a whole year if you're doing 3 chapters a day to incorporate the whole Talmud. We can understand it's a very long book, which contains 14 individual books. And at the end of the 14th book, the last law written in the Rambam says that in that era, the time of Mashiach, there will be neither famine, nor war, nor envy or competition, for good will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available as dust is now. How easy it is to pick up dust from the ground, that's how easy it's going to be to pick up all the good stuff. You want $1 million? Stick your hand and pick it right up. The occupation then in the entire world would be only to know God. Once we have everything else, what are we going to do? We're going to pursue the knowledge of God. Therefore, the Jews will be great sages. They'll know the hidden things. They will grasp the knowledge of their Creator according to the extent of human potential. Like the prophet Yeshaya says, Isaiah, the world will be filled with the knowledge of God as the waters cover the ocean bed. And that's the end of all this long book of the Rambam, what's going to be when Mashiach comes. Everybody's occupation is going to be to know God. Now, it's a famous thing in Jewish thought, and particularly in Jewish mysticism, that the end is wedged in the beginning. And the beginning is wedged in the end. So the end of the Rambam, which says that the occupation of the world is going to be to know God, we're going to be pursuing the knowledge of Hashem. Now, the beginning of the Rambam, the first chapter of the Rambam, tells us the first commandment that he's telling us. He says, the foundation of foundations and the pillar of wisdom is to know. The foundation of foundations is to have knowledge of God. So the I am that the Rambam says when Mashiach comes, that's what we're doing, acquiring knowledge of God. And the beginning of the Rambam tells us, what do we have to do? We have to know God. Now there's a very short and interesting passage in the Zohar, which also speaks about the commandment to know God. So we have the last halacha of the Rambam that tells us when Mashiach comes, we're going to pursue the knowledge of God. And we have the first halacha of the Rambam that tells us that it's a rule in the Torah. It's a commandment that we have to know God. So there's knowledge in both levels. And there's this Zohar that also says there is a mitzvah, a commandment to know God. The word know being the key word. The primordial mitzvah, it says in the Zohar, of all mitzvahs, and the original of all mitzvahs, is to know God. What do you mean? To know in general that there's a God. But the Zohar says, what do you mean in general? What does general mean? The word klal in Hebrew. It means the exact definition of general, that a general principle includes all the details of the subject. And that subject, those details of the study of knowing God, to bring a knowledge of God, is to know the details of the chain of descent of the worlds, through which the infinite connects to us limited creatures. And that chain of descent, are the particular levels that's included in the general commandment to know God. That's how you know God, by learning these details of how Hashem fits himself into the chain of descent to connect with us. And our Zohar lays out those details that are contained in the general principle. The commandment to know there's a God, and even more, to know God himself. And here are the details that are included in that general thing of knowing God. You have to know that there is a master on high, who's the boss of the world, who creates all worlds, the heaven and the earth, and all of their hosts. And that's what it means in general, which is all inclusive. The word in Hebrew is klal, kalo. It includes all those details. The Rebbe's father, Reb Leivik, explains that Zohar in detail. He points out that the beginning of the Zohar starts with the primordial mitzvah, which is to know God. And then right after that, in the second phrase, it says not the primordial mitzvah. He says it's the first mitzvah. You would think at first glance he could have said the primordial mitzvah is to know God. So why do you have to say it's the primordial mitzvah to know God? And it's the first mitzvah to know God. Why add that second phrase, which starts with first? And then after he says it's the first mitzvah, he says again it's the primordial mitzvah. So first he said it's the primordial mitzvah to know God. Then he said it's the first mitzvah to know God. And then, this is the Zohar, and then it says it's the primordial mitzvah. He says again to know God. What's going on here? Primordial in the first phrase indicates the level of the godly crown called Kesser. In the second phrase, where it says first, indicates godly wisdom, Chachma. And then when it says primordial again, it's talking about Bina. Like when Moshe Rabbeinu asked Hashem, what's your name? And Hashem said, Ekia Asher Ekia, I'll be what I'll be. So the first I will be is Kesser, and the second I will be is Bina, and in the middle you have a Chachma Asher. And then, like it says, this is the primordial mitzvah. What is? To know, which is the level of Das. So you have here Kesser, Chachma, Bina, and Das. So now we can understand the Zohar's explanation of the details included in the general mitzvah of knowing God. And this is what the Zohar said. I'm repeating it. You have to know there's a master on high who's the boss of the world, who creates all worlds, heaven and earth, and all their hosts. And that's what it means. In general, it means all-inclusive of how Hashem relates to the worlds. So in general, the all-inclusive level starts with master. You have to know he's the master of the world, which is the level of the Holy Ancient One. And that itself is included in Malchus of Adam Kadmon, which is the first primordial man. And Malchus means the king on high, which indicates Arachanta. So that's the master of the world on high. Now, the boss of the world is the level of Chachma, the level of godly wisdom. And then when it says creates all worlds, is the level of Bina, godly understanding. So in the Hebrew grammar, he says the Let's make sure we know what we're talking about here. In Hebrew grammar, it says the boss of the world is singular. But then when it gets down to Bina, it's plural. Chachma is like the drop, the seed from the Father. And Bina is how that seed is spread out into the limbs of the baby and becomes a person. So that's plural. Afterwards, you have the heaven and the earth, which is Zer Anpin and Malchus, and all their hosts is Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya, the three created worlds which feel separate from God. And in all of this, to know the level of Das stands between and connects all of these levels. It connects Achman to Bina and Bina to Zer Anpin and Malchus. And then from Zer Anpin and Malchus, it connects to the hosts, which are the created worlds, to accomplish the primordial mitzvah. And that's how we accomplish this primordial mitzvah of knowing God, by knowing how he connects to us through these levels. And that's what it means in general. It means all inclusive of the details. And that's how you know God, by learning the details of how he comes in to connect with us. To know all the levels of the Seder Astashalos, from the highest level, which is the level of the crown, all the way down to the lowest level, which is our world of action. And it's all hinted. Let's see if I can get it up. Do you see that document yet on the screen, or do I still have to share it? I guess you don't. Hang on, I'm going to share it. Yeah. Okay. Gimel Aleph. Can everybody see that word klal? Everybody sees the word klal?
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay. So the first letter, cha, is the first letter of the word keser, the word crown, like it sounds. A C, like a chaf, is the first letter of the word keser. And also included in it is chachma. How? Because chachma is a yud, and a yud is spelled yud vav daled, which adds up to 20, and the chaf is 20. So chachma is included in keser. The lamed, the first lamed, is 3 levels, and it's 3 times 10 because it's supernal levels of godliness, so it's times 10. And those levels are Bina, Zer Anpin, and Malchus in the world of Atzilus. And the last lamed is 3 levels, is Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiya. So you see how the word klal, the word in general, includes the whole Seder Astashalos. That's according to the Rebbe's father. It's a pretty cool chap. So we see in general in the word klal, all the details of the chain of descent. But so what? What does that have to do with the Siyum and the Rambam? Well, it has to do because we're saying that's how you know God, by knowing the details of the chain of descent. And that's what the Rambam said when Mashiach comes. That's what we're going to be spending our time, is acquiring knowledge of God. And the first law of the Rambam, like we said, is that it's a mitzvah to know there is a God and to know God. And this teaching from the Zohar will serve to connect for us the end of the Rambam, when the whole world will be occupied with gaining knowledge of God. And the beginning of the Rambam, where it tells us it is a foundation of foundations and pillar of wisdom. What? To know there's a God. To know. That's the key word. And our Rebbe points out this Zohar is actually, and this is a mind blower for me, this Zohar is the source of the first law of the Rambam and the whole first book of the Rambam. The commandment to know Hashem is really contained in that Zohar. And the Rambam translates that Zohar into Hebrew from Aramaic. And that's the first law of the Rambam. And actually, the very words that starts this monumental work are a Hebrew rendition of our Zohar. The Rambam was a big Kabbalist, and you could see it hinted in those first words of that first law where it says, the foundation of foundations, the pillar of wisdom is to know there's a God. Starts out, the acrostic is Yud Kei Vav Kei, the name of God. Foundation of foundations. And the pillar of wisdom is to know Hashem. To know there's a God. The primordial mitzvah, like the Zohar says, of mitzvahs, and the first mitzvah that the Rambam expresses. And Hashem, this one who we need to know, is the existence that brings out everything that exists. And we can point out that besides the first mitzvah is to know Hashem, in our Zohar, it tells us to know the existence of Hashem in himself, higher than the mitzvah. That's why this Zohar is about a time, it's telling about a parsha in the Torah before we got to Har Sinai and we got the mitzvah. It's about knowing Hashem for himself, a level of godliness higher than mitzvah, even higher than this first primordial mitzvah to know him. And the mitzvah of knowing him contains many details, and the Rambam is going to explain in details right away in the book of the chariot, the godly chariot, and the book of Bereshit. He's going to explain all these details so that we have the ability to know God. And this is all available in English at Chabad.org. It's going to start the new Rambam soon, and all you have to do is tune in to Chabad.org and go to the daily study, and you'll be able to follow all of this in English. And it will be a lot of fun because you're going to get God out of it. How do you like that, Gimel Elef?
Yeah, Bitzalel.
Yes.
So actually, we have a special song here about Rambam.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's written. It's a song composed by our dear friend Nehemiah Alpine Olav Shalom.
Whoa.
Yo, was the
I am doubly impressed.
Ram bam bam bim bam bam, learn your daily ram bam bam bim bam bam, learn your daily ram bam bam. Hey, a day to talk in my day, learn your daily ram bam bam. Hey, a day to talk in my day, learn your daily ram bam bam. Ram bam bim bam bam, learn your daily ram bam bam. Ram bam bam bim bam bam, learn your daily ram bam bam. A pay day, we buck him a day, learn your daily ram bam bam. A pay day, buck him a day, learn your daily ram bam bam. Ram bam bam bim bam bam, learn your daily ram bam bam. Bim bam bam, learn your daily ram bam bam. A pay day, we buck him a day.
Wow, Nehemiah. What a cool dude.
Yeah, that's I
Cool
remember
song.
I was there when he sang it. I was there,
Cool
you know.
song.
Wait, he played it on the piano for you?
On the piano, on the fiddle, on a funny instrument that doesn't have a name because he built it out of three other instruments that he found in a pawn shop.
I want to play that instrument.
Yeah, there's a very special.
Did he have a name for it?
Yeah, it's called Ram Bam Bam Bim Bam Bam.
Bim bam bam. Cheery bam. Cheery beam.
Yeah.
I like that one.
Yeah, this is from our good friend Chemia Alpine Oliver Sholem, was a very good friend to us all.
Okay. You want, yeah, you know what? I think before, I'm going to share this on the screen, but I got too much stuff open. I don't know what's going on here. Let's try this again.
Don't worry, but Samuel, I have nothing open and I still don't know what's going on.
Me too.
Boris, you know what's going on. Don't be modest. Do you see anything on the screen there that I'm sharing?
Yeah, there we go. Now,
Oh, I see it.
Okay, but first, I want to make sure we're on the same page, Gimel Aleph. I want to ask you a few questions.
yeah, well,
You
we'll
want a
make
book?
sure we're on the same screen.
We said, Gimel Aleph, we said last time and the time before that Hashem connects to us, and we understand that connection through two different metaphors. Do you remember what they are?
Well, he connects from like a Python.
Python, exactly.
That was one of them.
Are you following this, Boris?
Yes, I am. Trying.
Since you're right, since we have a brain and intellect, so also Hashem dresses himself into a godly intellect, so that we're able to have some understanding of godliness. And just like we have a attribute of kindness, so Hashem dresses himself into attribute of kindness, which is called his right hand. And you're exactly correct. And the other metaphor is names.
Right. Like just like a Python, when you call the name, he turns to you. So the same thing when you call Hashem by one of the names, like when you call the name of kindness, it makes his kindness appear.
He turns to you with a face of kindness.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting. We see it in the story of the Rashbi, when the Balabatim needed rain, and they weren't getting rain. It was a drought. So they came to the Rebbe, who was the Rashbi, to get a bracha for rain. So when they came there, they asked the students, they want a bracha from the Rashbi. And the students went into the Rashbi, and they started praising him with praises. You are the face of the Shekhinah. You are the Shabbos. You are Levi Yosef. The Rashbi needed their praises? No. Through their praises, they got his attention. They were able to draw out these high levels from him, so that finally he was able to say a Torah that would bring rain. Do you remember what Torah he said? It's a famous song. Can we do that, Niggin? Hine matovo menayim sheves achim gam yachad. Hine matovo menayim sheves achim gam yachad.
Hine הנה מתי וגם יחד הנה מתי ומנויים
שבט אחים גם יחד, הנה מתי ומנויים, שבט אחים גם יחד.
יפעם.
הנה מתי שבט אחים גם יחד הנה מתי שבט אחים גם יחד הנה מתי ומנויים שבט אחים גם
יחד.
And what it means, Sheves Achim Gam Yachad, is how good it is, Hine Matovu, how good it is when brothers sit together, like us in our Farbrengen now, with everybody who's joining in with us. And Hashem gets a lot of nachas out of that. And it causes that even though whatever we did that causes Hashem to face away from us, that Hine Matova Menaim Sheves Achim Gam Yachad causes that Hashem should turn his face to us and shine on us with a good face and a happy face and a beautiful face, and that we will be able to live in that radiance. Now, we explained before, you probably remember, that the way that we are able to understand godliness as opposed to the ancient generations, when they had either a lofty soul or they were able to fast and roll around naked in the snow and inflict themselves to the point where they came refined. But the Alter Rebbe came with a revolutionary system to be able to understand and internalize godliness through the intellect, called the service of Chabad, Chachma, Bina, and Das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And we said, Chachma is the idea itself, higher than being able to be expressed in words and letters. Bina is the tangible explanation in words and letters of that idea. And Das, which we talked about before, the level of knowledge, is the bonding of the mind through focusing on the Chachma or the Bina. Now, do you want to do this, Gimel Aleph, or should I do it? I'll start. If you want to come in on it, come on. Now, we need to understand how each of these three levels, Chachma, Bina, and Das, each one has three dimensions. And the three dimensions are depth, width, and length. So Chachma is going to have a depth, width, and length.
Bitzalel,
Yeah,
I have a question.
yeah.
Why is the three levels, Keser, Chachma, and Bina, of Chachma, Bina, and Das, instead of Chachma, Bina, and Das of Das?
You mean Chachma, Bina, and Das of Chachma, Bina, and Das?
Yeah, instead it's Keser,
Yeah.
Chachma, and Bina.
Right.
Good card from the day part.
Well, I think the simple answer is because the Kesser of each level will be the point that connects the lower level to the higher level. And that will be the depth. Like if you have two walls, the point where they touch is called their Kesser, is called their depth. But that depth, that Kesser is not there at all. All there is two walls touching. And any way you measure is one of those walls. There is no measurement to that point where they connect. And that's called the depth or the Kesser in any intellectual pursuit, especially the intellectual pursuit of godliness, like the mitzvah that we said is to know God. And how is that accomplished? Through bonding to godliness. But we don't have the ability to bond with undiluted 96er godliness, we have to bond to an idea and an explanation about godliness. And through that, we'll be able to connect to godliness. Does that help?
Yeah, Bitzalo, that helps.
Good. Now the depth, first, he's going to explain what depth is in general. And depth means it has nothing for itself at all. Its only function is to connect one thing to another. The depth itself is essentially non-existent. So how does it have a name depth if it's non-existent? And he's going to give examples. For example, a wall whose corner is a right angle, the two sides of the wall run, for example, east and south, like on Gezintahait Street. There's a corner of Gezintahait Street and 770 Boulevard. And at that corner, there's either 770 Boulevard or Gezintahait Street. There is no point that connects them, just the fact that they touch there. Any measurement a person makes from the corner of the wall is either so much south or so much east. The point which connects them, which is called the corner, cannot be measured. It's only a point which connects east and south. Clear?
Yeah, this macht sense, Bitzalo.
Or mock sense. The point which connects them, which is called the corner, cannot be measured. It's only the point which connects the east wall and the south wall when they touch. So since it cannot be measured, it doesn't exist as a separate, tangible, measurable existence. But it does have some level of existence. It has a name, as evidenced by the fact it has a name. It exists. It's called a corner. So too the depth of an intellectual function is a dimensionless point called nothing, called ayin. And it connects one level to another. Just like in our example of the walls connected by a corner, which is the nothing which connects the two walls. And without that connection, they would be separate south and east walls if they weren't touching. So the corner here is the metaphor for depth in the intellect. It represents, for example, the point which connects Bina, the understanding of the idea, to Chachma, the idea itself. After all, the explanation of the idea has to be connected to the idea. And how are they connected? Through this depth, through the depth of Bina. And that is the example of depth on the level of space. And now we're going to have an example of depth on the level of time. Another example of depth is twilight time, which is the nothing that connects day and night. You have either day or you have night. But there's a point that connects them. But it's not apprehendable. It's the point that connects them. We call it twilight. But it's not a measurable point of time. After all, every night it's a different time. So even though it connects daytime to night, it is not measurable as day or night. Because whatever time it is, as expounded in Jewish law, is either daytime or nighttime. But they are connected by this immeasurable point. How about, should we do a niggun now? Is this getting too heavy? Should we have a little sherbet between courses?
Mitzalel.
Yeah.
We have a minhag to sing one of the songs that we do from Shabbos. So we sing this one.
Sounds good. Go for it. Oh, yeah. Thank you, boys. Now, a more spiritual example, Gimel Aleph, I want you to concentrate on this because I'm going to ask you to give it back to us next week. I'm going to ask you to explain it next week. A more spiritual example of depth is that of a teacher who teaches a concept to his student. The teacher has to manifest the level of nothing. He has to give himself away. He does this by removing his thoughts from his own level of cognition, the essential light of his own intellect. He takes himself away from that and descends to the level necessary to communicate the concept to the student. In a simple way, the teacher knows that mathematics is an infinitely predictable algorithm. But he can't go into a second grade class and tell them that. What does he do? He goes in with a bag of apples and he puts 4 apples on the desk. And he says, you see, kids, here's 2 apples and here's 2 apples. How many apples are there? Oh, there's 4 apples. Right. 2 apples and 2 apples equals 4 apples. So he gives himself away in order to connect with the student. The student also must nullify and leave his own thoughts and preoccupations that he was occupied with until now in order to receive the teaching from his Rebbe. The kid has to go away from the cartoons and the ball game and whatever he's involved in to concentrate on what the Rebbe has to tell him. And that's going to be the nothing, the depth of the student, emptying himself to be able to receive. And just as there must be a nothing in the level of teacher, there has to be a nothing of the student. He exerts himself to empty his mind. of all preconceived ideas in order to receive the teaching from the teacher. And in achieving that level of nothing, the student manifests a state of self-nullification to receive the teaching from the teacher. And all those who make their own concerns less and less and are more nullified to the wisdom that they're going to receive from the Rebbe, they widen their intellect to receive the flow from the teacher. And this self-nullification, the nothing of the student, in which he empties his mind to receive the teaching from the teacher, is called the depth of the student. Just as the self-nullification of the teacher, in which he distances himself from his own intellectual pursuits in order to teach the student, is called the depth, the nothing of the teacher. So you have two levels of depth, two levels of nothing. One, the teacher gives himself away to connect with the student. Two, the student gives away all of his own concerns and empties his mind to receive from the teacher, which is called the nothing or the depth of the student. So the concept of depth on the part of the student is the nothing of the student. The act of emptying the mind in order to receive the teaching from the teacher allows for the inner intention of the teacher to be fulfilled. That's the whole reason the teacher is connecting to the student, is so the student will get it. The student should receive and digest the teaching. And through the depth, the omek of the student, the flow will be absorbed by the student very well. So this emptying of the mind, making the mind an empty vessel, like if you want a cup of juice, you have to pour out the water that was filling the cup to be able to have the juice come in. And that's called the emptiness, the depth, the omek of chachma of the student who receives the teaching, connecting the student to the teacher. And the metaphor of the teacher and the student, and the two previous metaphors of the wall and twilight, illustrated the concept of depth in general, which brings us to understand the particular depth of the level of chachma, the depth of wisdom. And I think this is a good place to take a break for tonight. How did you like that, Gimel Aleph? Was that enlightening? It left him breathless. Do you guys have a niggin we can go out with? What do you think, Boris? What kind of niggin do we have?
Russian nigga, maybe? I don't know.
We don't know. All right. In the meantime, I'm going to sing one of my versions of Ad Mosai, and it's my version of Avinu Malkeinu. Oh, maybe you can do that one, the boogie, the Beis Hamikdash boogie. Anyway, I'm going to sing this one first. Oh, Tati, our king, why don't you do a good thing? And please return with your people. And the angels all sing, oh, glorious King.
Hey!
Hello? I would say that you guys expressed in a very low key and a very groovy way the heartbeat and the pulse of the Jewish heart. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to sing the sign off song, if that's okay with everybody. We're going to sign off now. Ready? Gezintahait, 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 my friend. Remember, kids, Gezintahait. We love you, folks. Thanks for tuning in.